from the very earliest days of the Sherman Park Community Association, we had our own model that we didn't change from. We felt that we were people who lived here, who cared about the neighborhood, and who wanted to welcome people. Anybody who wanted to move here was welcome, but nobody should leave simply because of fear.
It's a beautiful middle-class area, very diverse. We have African Americans, Latinos, whites, a very, very heavy Orthodox Jewish population in that area. And they all coexist because as neighbors, we also understand that united we stand, divided we fall.
I think it's important to point out that in years before, the goal of those organizations which brought religious groups together was simply to learn tolerance from each other. I think that we have progressed toward that, to be able to celebrate each other's difference. And I think that that's a credit to this community and to the diversity that it's worked toward.
Where is Milwaukee's Sherman Park neighborhood, and how did it get so diverse? The area that most locals call Sherman Park actually encompasses a number of neighborhoods in over 3 square miles on the northwest side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
The Sherman Park Community Association, when you look at the totality of this neighborhood, goes from 30th Street on the east to 60th on the west, from North Avenue on the south up to Capitol. There are about 42,000 plus individuals who live in this neighborhood.
Residents began to settle Sherman Park in the late teens and early 20s of the last century. Many were attracted to the suburban look of the area on the edge of the city. Developers had created wide tree-lined streets and boulevards, but the beautiful homes were the neighborhood signature. The large bungalows, duplexes, and period revival homes were finely crafted from brick, wood, and stone. English and Mediterranean architectural styles prevailed. And who were the people who settled Sherman Park? The first arrivals to the area were primarily Germans and Czechs, migrating from various Milwaukee neighborhoods. Later, migrants were diverse groups representing over 20 nations from nearly every continent. However, the largest of the later arriving groups were Jewish and African Americans. To understand the later migration patterns, one must look to another Milwaukee neighborhood that thrived in the middle of the 20th century. This is the lost community sometimes known as Bronzeville. The Bronzeville community had been home to the ancestors of many key players in the current Sherman Park neighborhood. The community that would be called Bronzeville by many residents was located in an area between downtown Milwaukee and North Avenue and roughly 1st Street to 17th Street. The area had first been home to a large segment of Milwaukee German community. By 1910, a 10,000-strong population of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, Russia, and the Ukraine had settled in the area. Within a few years, African Americans from the South began their great migration to the North in response to needs to fill jobs in mainly urban centers. By the 1950s, the black population in Bronzeville was nearly 50,000. Two institutions that would later be critical to the stability of Sherman Park were founded in the Bronzeville area. St. Joseph Regional Medical Center had its roots in a little house on Walnut Street and built its first hospital on 4th and Reservoir. Beth Yehuda Synagogue was on 11th and North Avenue, and most congregants lived in this neighborhood. Many of the older activist families in Sherman Park lived in or had close relatives in the Bronzeville area before migrating northwest. In fact, the Bronzeville area had two dynasty families that would later be critical to the development of Sherman Park and surrounding areas. The Twerskys were one dynasty family. They had founded the Beth Yehuda Synagogue. The Coggs were another dynasty family.
In 1928, my grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Tursky, came to the United States from a small town outside of Kiev. He began his small synagogue on 11th and North, and in 1952, I believe, he moved the synagogue from 11th and North to 54th and Center. At the time, that's really where the largest concentration of Jews in the city were. There were 4 or 5 synagogues right around there, and my grandfather's synagogue had mostly Russian immigrants, a fair number of Americans, and some of the Holocaust survivors.
My family has a very interesting history in the Bronzeville and Sherman Park area. My great-grandfather, Isaac Milton, the Reverend Isaac Milton Coggs, started the old Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in the Bronzeville area. Very prominent church is there even till today. His sons, my great-uncle, Theodore Ted Coggs, was a very prominent attorney in the Bronzeville area, especially on Walnut. He had an office on Walnut. And his youngest brother, Isaac Newton Coggs, who became Representative Isaac Coggs, represented that area for a number of years. And coincidentally, later on, his wife, Marcia Coggs, also as a state representative, the first black female representative in Wisconsin, represented that same area. Their daughter, Elizabeth Coggs Jones, is a county supervisor in the Bronzeville area. And Marcia, when she retired, my cousin Leon Young took over in that area as well. And lastly, myself as a state senator, I also represent that area. So we have a community service tradition going on around there. And later on, my Uncle Ted and his family moved to the Sherman Park area, so that's how I became very familiar with the Sherman Park area as well.
My grandfather had a reputation in the city as being, was called in Yiddish, the Gute Yid. He was the person who everybody turned to in a time of crisis for advice. He was brought in by judges to settle cases who, in fact, they were not even Jewish cases. And he had a citywide following of reverence and respect.
What happened to Bronzeville? Bronzeville was leveled in the 1950s and 1960s. During these years, 2 government programs were displacing major populations in Milwaukee. One program was the Urban Renewal Administration, which had been designed to improve central city housing. During the same time period, the Milwaukee County Expressway Commission was building major freeway corridors in the heart of the city. One corridor ran through the heart of Bronzeville. Over 6,000 homes were lost in nearly 100% of its business district. Most of the Bronzeville populations moved to northwestern sections of Milwaukee, including Sherman Park. As new populations left the central city and moved into Sherman Park, the neighborhood faced its own challenges. At times, residents struggled to understand cultural differences, a challenge that still exists today when new populations arrive.
I'm reminded of a fabulous incident I had at the St. Joseph's Hospital, where I got into an elevator, and these 2 teenage girls got onto the elevator and looked me up and down and said, "Who are you supposed to be?" And I looked at them and said, "What did you say?" And they look at me again and they say, "Well, who are you supposed to be?" And I'm wondering how they knew that I was going through this identity crisis at the time. And when they finally got off the elevator, the doors opened and there was a huge sign across the nurses' station saying "Happy Halloween," and I finally understood what the question they were asking was.
Local businesses also had to adapt to changing ethnic groups.
My early years in Sherman Park, I would say about 34 years ago, we moved into a neighborhood in Sherman Park. That community was considered a neighborhood in transition. And when we moved there, trying to find a place to get my son's haircut was really difficult. I was told, went to a local barbershop right around the corner from my house, and the businesses there were basically white. And barbershop, I went into the barbershop and asked him if he would cut my son's hair, and he told me that he didn't cut black people's hair. And I found that I was a little taken back by that. I thought a skilled barber could cut anybody's hair. But that was just a part of the realization of the neighborhood that I was in.
The ethnic groups themselves were internally diverse, and some moved in and out of the area. The history of the Jewish population in the neighborhood was particularly complex.
In 1989, the rabbi built a day school on the corner of 51st and Keefe, opened an adult learning center with 10 full-time rabbis, and the community earned a grant in the early 90s to grow the community. In the last 10 years, that effort has brought over 100 families into the Sherman Park Jewish community.
I was born and raised here in Milwaukee in Fox Point, which is a suburb north of Sherman Park. Went out east to law school in Washington, D.C. My wife and I got married then and moved out to California. After living in California for a number of years, we realized that it was not a place for a married couple without children, and if you wanted to have children, there were nicer places to live in the country. At that time, my parents still resided here in Milwaukee, and so did my grandparents, and we thought coming back to Milwaukee would be a nice place, a nice decision, and that's what we did.
One of our initial goals in this Renaissance community was creating the type of Orthodox community in America which would attract our own children. That's beginning to happen now, and the general age of the community is becoming younger and younger. And we're just about to embrace a new 10-year campaign, which would involve the resettling of 200 families. And we believe that now we have a track record of being able to do that, and that the rate of growth would really be exponential.
A major challenge has always been serving the interests of both the middle-class residents and those at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. But Sherman Park residents shared similar characteristics. Some of these were the values and common group experiences they brought with them from Bronzeville. Other collective traits were developed through long processes of neighborhood activism. Most Sherman Park residents are passionate about their religions, and the faith communities are as diverse as their cultures. In turn, the churches and synagogues have played important roles in consolidating the neighborhood.
You have mass majority. Everybody can serve their own type of God, their own type of faith, their own type of maker. And to be able to do that and be in a community that's as caring and loving and as pure at Sherman Park made me really feel comfortable to live here. And it still goes on to this day, and that's a great value.
The founder of the Hasidic movement, who was an ancestor of ours, the Baal Shem Tov, lived in the early 1700s, brought to Judaism a fervor, a joy. And that was based upon not novel thought that somehow the Baal Shem Tov created, but emphases, points of critical practice that the Baal Shem Tov reinvigorated among Jewish practice, where things had become stale, things had become habit. The Baal Shem Tov emphasized re-infusing them with joy. So if you were to come to a Hasidic center, you had to come to a congregation Beth Yehuda for a Shabbos service. There's a lot of singing, there's dancing, there's emphasis on beautifying mitzvahs, the commands that we fulfill. There's the Hasidic flavor is an enhancement which is layered on top of the basic required law that all Orthodox Jews observe.
Many residents of Sherman Park were attracted to the area by the beauty of the neighborhood and its homes.
When I was a young girl, me and my girlfriend, who now lives on Grant, we used to sell war cries in this neighborhood for the Salvation Army. We always thought one day we'd get out the projects and move to Sherman Park. And to see it as a reality, it's just been a blessing. I now own one of the houses that I know I came to and knocked on the door for a donation for the Salvation Army. And to be able to know that I've been able to achieve this goal in my life just lets me know there's things called blessings and there's a God. And I'm just glad to know that I have been able to succeed one of the things and the goals in my life. To be able to live in Sherman Park, a lovely neighborhood, it's always have been, and hopefully it will continue to be.
Others remain in Sherman Park because of the presence of art forms, from the prevalence of blossoming gardens and parks to local and frequent public concerts. Sherman Park residents who migrated from Bronzeville remember what happened to that community during freeway construction.
The Sherman Park Community Association began in 1971 when a group of residents who lived along Sherman Boulevard became concerned about the fractioning of the neighborhood because of the east-west corridor expressway that was cutting through the neighborhood. And they began to organize around the issue of taking away quality homes, historic quality homes, and putting an expressway right down the heart of the north side of the city.
The county had decided to build a freeway for a long time before it actually happened. And before anybody, citizens, knew about it, many, many houses had been torn down. And in addition to that, the freeway was being planned without much citizen input.
There was a perception that individuals in the lower economic strata were going to be south of where the expressway was. Individuals on the north side would be in a different economic strata. And so there was a quality life issue, there was a justice issue, and then there was the perception that the expressway was going to bring divisiveness to the neighborhood.
Well, we heard about it and we decided we were going to fight it. And apparently everybody thought that we had no chance whatsoever of doing it. Actually, there was a group of people, it was a coalition of groups, and they were utterly opposed to the thing, but they didn't really know what to do about it. Ultimately, what happened was we took it into court. And the county had come to the conclusion that they could build a freeway without actually setting up an environmental impact statement. And we thought that was just utterly ridiculous that they should do that. So we challenged them on that score, and we came to the conclusion that they had to go along with the idea of an environmental impact statement. And we thought that might be an entering wedge. And the citizens marched to stop the thing.
We had a real friend in federal court Judge John Reynolds, and he had a very good concept, a very supportive concept of what cities should be like, what city governments should be like, what neighborhoods should be like. And so he was a real asset. I mean, it's not like we automatically got what we wanted, but he listened. He ordered the stopping of the freeway. It was stopped on the basis of no environmental impact statement 1 day before the contracts were to be let to build the freeway.
Activism for safety, aesthetics, and justice would become a way of life for the people of Sherman Park, but their collective action took on a rather unique Sherman Park civility. New residents were often introduced to the neighborhood's notion of living with grace.
As I moved into Sherman Park, I realized how gorgeous of a neighborhood it was. And to keep it that way, neighbors needed to make sure they talked to new neighbors and newcomers. And I had no problem going by taking newcomers, new neighbors, a loaf of bread, but I also had no problem telling their children if they'd be in the street shooting firecrackers or if they had pet bulls not on leashes, that we were a neighborhood that was caring and family oriented. And we wanted to be able to walk down the street and speak and not worry about the dog coming. We didn't want to worry about being woke up because all of us had different types of jobs where we couldn't get a rest because some child was doing something like popping firecrackers or the music too loud. And doing those type of things made us be able to become good neighbors. So their parents knew that I would talk to them if something was good or something bad, and to help everybody enjoy the neighborhood that we still have this day at Sherman Park.
Gracious wars and communal action for safety, aesthetics, and justice have continued from the 60s to the present day.
We didn't use confrontational methods. We didn't use, Alinsky was in very high favor at that time in Chicago. We refused things like that because we did not want the confrontations. We felt we could accomplish much more by just quiet pressure, quiet, constant pressure. And that proved to be the case.
Blockbusting is a very nefarious tactic that was used a lot in the 70s in Milwaukee, and the Sherman Park Community Association fought it vigorously. They worked out with the city's common council that they could limit the number of for sale signs in a particular neighborhood so it wouldn't look like people were abandoning whole neighborhoods. At the time, I was a health inspector for the city of Milwaukee and kind of worked in a surreptitious fashion with Sherman Park because what I would do is I would go and patrol in the area as an inspector. If I saw more than 2 for sale signs in a neighborhood, I would alert Sherman Park so that they could swoop in and make sure that those neighbors did not have a number of those for sale signs that made it look like everybody was abandoning the neighborhood. I'm very proud of what they did.
They'll hang something on a doorknob saying this will introduce Mrs. So-and-so with a very obviously ethnic name and her 10 or 15 children or something, intending to scare people and figure, oh my goodness, I think we better leave.
I can cite one example, dealt with the getting street signs, stop signs for our block in order to eliminate some of the accidents that we were having. We advocated to our aldermen and also to City Hall in order to get 4-way stop signs before someone was injured. But it wasn't easy to do. But by tying it to a quality of life issue, we thought that would be a way to get it done. And so finally we were able to, after much advocacy, have stop signs placed from 35th Street to Fond du Lac on Townsend, and we were glad for that.
But none of the work of citizen groups would have been possible without the efforts of the neighborhood's institutions. These include the churches, synagogues, businesses, schools, and community-based organizations. Three organizations that contribute heavily to the neighborhood's stability and shared cultural identity have been the Sherman Park Association, St. Joseph Center, and the Burleigh Street Community Development Corporation.
We work with neighbors to create block clubs, block watches, empower the people in the community to take control of their community. We run a couple of programs, the Minor Home Repair Program and also the Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative Program, which helps to improve the housing stock in the community.
St. Joseph have contributed by offering their employees down payment on some of their housing to live in the neighborhood. They've renovated that hospital because at one point they was talking about moving out of the neighborhood or even closing altogether. And lately, over the past 3 or 4 years, they've had concert series where they offer jazz and blues for people in the community, and that's very valuable to the community.
The Burleigh Street CDC was formed in the summer of 1980. Its primary goal is economic development and commercial revitalization in the Sherman Park area. Our first major accomplishment was the building of the Burleigh Street Enterprise Center in a number of years ago. It's a public-private development with retail spaces on the first floor and a community hall on the second floor, located at 54th and Burleigh Street. Since that, our next major project has been a project called Vision Sherman Park, which is designed to create a vision for the neighborhood, what people want Sherman Park to be, what kind of people we want to move here, what kind of businesses we'd like to relocate here, and so on. Another major development or accomplishment of our CDC has been the Main Street project. Main Street is a mechanism for creating wealth and bringing businesses to a location, and that's what we've done on Burleigh Street and Sherman Park.
The Sherman Park neighborhood has enjoyed remarkable success in consolidating one neighborhood out of many communities. Unlike other successful localities where the majority of residents shared at least one demographic trait, Sherman Park has always been challenged with integrating a vast number of differences, including cultures, religions, and socioeconomic classes. The process of building the neighborhood has been aided by strong local organizations. In addition, some of the groups that settled in Sherman Park had lived together in the middle of the 20th century in the past community of Bronzeville. They had a head start in developing shared values and also collectively witnessed the annihilation of the old neighborhood by government policies. When similar policies threatened the well-being of Sherman Park, they held firm and fought the good fight. They battled in ways that reflected their shared values graciously.